Councillor Smith.
Non-disclosable interest in item 14 regarding private landlords.
Are there any more? Thank you. Item 2, minutes of previous meetings. Full council on the 18th of January. Are they a true and accurate record? Proposed by Vice Chair. No, sorry. Vice Chair's got something to say. Sorry.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, if you could turn to page 9, at the top of the page, number 3, resolution. We agreed that a progress report on the external review of management and operations be brought to the March 18 meeting. We obviously weren't expecting the completed work to be completed by March. So we just need the word progress to be put before report, please.
Anything else? They're a true and accurate record. Proposed by Councillor Guy, seconded by Councillor Mumford. All those in favour? Unanimous, thank you. Inshore fisheries, Councillor Guy.
Is that on here?
No?
Aren't you going on to 2 first, or 3?
Sorry,
Chairman's announcements.
I've turned up, yeah.
Chairman's announcements first.
I've missed a bit, yeah. Sorry, I do apologise. Getting ahead of myself. Chairman's announcements, I have none. Questions under standing orders 14. There's been none published. Now we'll move on to committee reports, including minutes and draft minutes. Councillor Guy.
Thank you, Chairman. I would like to present to full council the inshore fisheries conservation minutes on the 11th of January, as stated in the agenda pack.
Health and Wellbeing Board. Councillor Williams.
I think the minutes starting on page 19 capture the meeting adequately. For any queries or questions, I'm happy to take them.
Thank you. Scrutiny Committee, Councillor Mumford.
I'd like to present the minutes for February the 1st. If there's any questions, I'm willing to answer them.
Thank you. We have no motions according to Standing Order 12. Have we any member updates at the moment? Councillor Marcus?
Yes, Chair. I'd like to bring members of focus to the announcement from, bear with me a second, the Planning Inspectorate, that they are going to reimburse the council the full amount of £6,028.80 that was awarded against us for the Holy Vale decision. I'd like to congratulate the officers for their hard work and their tenacity in getting the result that was deserved.
Thank you very much indeed for that. Any further updates? Yep. Moving on. Urgent items. We are going to take the budget monitoring item on this one, which is in supplement pack 1. I'm going to pass over to our 151 officer, Andy.
Thank you, Chair. So, in terms of the supplementary pack, starting on page 1, as I have it, is the latest revenue budget monitoring for 2017-18, which shows the position as at the end of January. So largely a positive report in terms of the current position, with only 3 months of the financial, 2 months of the financial year to go at that point in time. Members may recall that we were forecasting an overspend of just over 200,000. That was predominantly down to a provision that I was allowing for around £250,000 for financing of capital based on historic trends and estimates in terms of what I felt was prudent at that point in time. The capital monitoring report that we took to council in January last month showed that there was revenue contributions required of 61,000 that hadn't been allowed for within the budget. This report confirms that the revenue contributions to capital projects is now at 73. That's been allowed for and forecasted within the estimate outturn. And as you can see from Appendix 1 on page 3, the latest forecast position for the council is an underspend of 209,000. So the detail is set out in addition to the numbers on Appendix 1. Manager commentary is appended starting on in Appendix 2, starting on page 4, going over to page 7 in terms of explanations around the variances and understanding within those numbers. Budget monitoring continues to be improvement. It's a journey that we're going on. The new system is still planned to go live next month, and that will further aid that process and the monitoring going into the next financial year as well. So it's a positive position. I will still caveat it somewhat in terms of the data, but things are improving as we put more focus and resource into the position and understanding of the data, particularly as we're moving to the new system and cleansing what the balances that we held in the balance sheet for the authority. Also, for the first time, I'm conscious this has been on members' requests. We've put on page 8 in Appendix 3 progress in terms of delivery of savings in 17-18 against the 609. And there's a little commentary around each of those progress from the responsible manager for those savings. And that, again, is largely positive on what has happened so far this financial year. And we'll, again, continue to improve on that in terms of tracking throughout the financial year, because appreciate the position as at the end of January, the majority of the financial year has happened. So it's in terms of the timeliness that members get that information on the monitoring as well as the tracking of savings. Happy to leave it there and open it to questions. Thank you, Chair.
So a couple of comments I'd like to make from the chair is that it's a pleasure to only have it caveated this time instead of heavily caveated. Thank you, Andy. Which may seem a little bit facetious to say, however, it does exemplify the fact that we are making progress and significant progress at that. And thank you, Andy, to yourself and all your team for doing that. It is significant. We are in a position now that we can actually put realistic figures on things rather than Mickey Mouse ones. And to that, we really need a firm basis to make the progress. We're on a beginning of a journey. We realise that, but the journey has now got a reasonably firm footing. Thank you very much indeed. Questions? Vice Chair.
Thank you. I'd just like to back the Chairman's statement and say it is pleasing progress, but we do need to remain watchful. That members are absolutely committed to working with our officers and with Andy and team support, not to rest on our laurels, but to see how we can embed the progress that we've made in further progress going forward. It will be much easier to monitor the budget, obviously, with the new systems. I'm sure there'll be a few hiccups when new systems come in. There always are, but we look forward to those very shortly. Right, I've got about 4 questions, please. My first question would be on page 5, please, where we note the potential issue relating to outstanding billing for the year, in some instances around Park House. Can I ask Ms. Khan if that is progressing, please?
Yes, it is.
Thank you, that's great. And a little bit further down, can I ask, Children's Services have identified some grant income that they plan to roll forward into 18-19. Can I ask why you haven't managed to spend this so far? Is there any danger that we will lose this? I don't know who I should be addressing this to.
This is income from the SEN reform grant and traineeship grant awarded
Fine, thank you. It says here, just a little bit further down, that the movement will be subject to agreement from the Section 151 officer. Is that going to pose you any problems, Mr. Brown?
I hate to use the word caveat again, but everything will depend on the outturn position. As it currently stands, everything is positive, but the rolling forward of funds can only really be done in terms of the overall position for the council. So at the moment, yes, everything looks fine for this to happen. We also need to bear in mind the conditions and the ring fencing of the grant, and looking in ensuring that we're adhering to any of that may come from government. So as it stands, it is always a matter in terms of the final outturn for the council, and we've already factored in actually for that to happen. So as it stands, the conditions will be fine, but the subject to agreement is always because this is a forecast position to the end of the year. You need to know the final position before we can finally agree to such a position.
Thank you. Third question on page 6, there's a significant drop in income from the Porthmelon Enterprise Centre, which is a bit of a concern, obviously. And we seemed, I think, to have this report the last time we were discussing finance. Are we taking any urgent steps to try and address it? Are we actively trying to get more people to use the centre, Mr. Dryden?
Chairman, just in terms of the language, there hasn't technically been a drop in income per se, in terms of what we've actually achieved in the past. What there is there's actually less income than we anticipated at this particular part of the year. What we are doing, we are looking at, we are marketing the premises, and we are hopeful that hopefully income will increase as a consequence of that marketing exercise. So we are hopeful that income will actually increase over the coming years, but it's obviously, again, caveated, is dependent on demand.
Of course, thank you. And my last question, well, last for the minute, page 8, when we look at the delivery of savings, there are 2 savings still to be achieved. One from the learning in the library, which I gather might be related to a need to cover maternity leave. So I'm sort of happy to leave that one on the back burner. But further down, the fortnightly waste collection. Could you give us a bit more detail about the 49,500 that are still to be achieved? Will this have any impact on any other service areas, please? Obviously it will, but can you give us a bit more detail?
Chairman, you'll appreciate that in terms of the kind of waste management services, we have been looking at to provide the most effective and efficient services possible. We haven't been able to do the fortnightly collections, and that's because of the nuances on the islands. Particularly, we don't just deal with domestic, we also deal with commercial waste, and so there's a particular pressure there. But if you actually look at the budget monitoring, and bearing in mind that those savings were actually incorporated into the waste management budget at the beginning of the year, we are on track to actually achieve a balanced budget. So we've made savings elsewhere, but not necessarily because of the switch to the kind of fortnightly collections. We've been doing work elsewhere.
Thank you.
Councillor Francis.
Thank you, Chairman. Could I ask, please, on page 5, under Strategic Development and Finance, the subject there is brought up about vacancies. And as we know from looking at the figures from last year, any savings that we've managed to achieve in the last year have broadly been around vacancies not being filled. And we're still here and we're still functioning. And I would ask that even though there may be earmarked opportunities for recruitment moving forward, that the officers consider this very carefully in forward recruitment as to whether or not it is absolutely necessary at this time. And thank you, Chairman. That's one point. The other...
Can I just comment on that?
Yes.
Yeah, all vacancies that are going to be filled, backfilled or whatever, do come to the corporate leadership team, which myself and the Vice Chair sit on. So they are monitored very closely as well. So you can be reassured of that, Councillor Francis.
Thank you, Chairman. The next item was on page 3 or page 11. I'm not sure which one we're looking at, but it's 2.7, and there seems to be.
Sorry, can you say where it is again, please? I've lost you.
It's page 11 of this report.
That's the next report.
Oh, sorry.
So that's the next report.
I'm sorry, Chairman. I'll come back again.
Okay. Are there any more questions on this report? Yeah, Councillor Legg.
Thank you, Chair. On page 8 in Appendix 3, saving SD4 shows that it's not achieved, but the savings have been offset by in-year efficiencies. Saving IP3 says that it hasn't been achieved, but the savings have been made through ongoing efficiencies. However, one is listed as not being achieved and the number is in one column and the other is in the other column. Seems a bit inconsistent. I wondered if anyone would like to comment on that.
Sorry, could you go through that again? You lost me a little bit there.
So the 40,000 IP3 should probably be in savings to be achieved, as that specific saving hasn't been achieved. However, the saving has been made elsewhere, but that saving has not been achieved.
Shall I answer that quickly? It has to do with what the type of saving it is. Saving SD4 was a physical activity whereby we were going to consolidate the one-stop shop activities. So basically have lesser front doors. The reason that activity could not be implemented was the current IT and particularly the telephone system. Hence, this was put on hold going forward. So that's a physical activity. Saving IP3 is more an administrative paper saving by recharging and charging within the budget different items, and therefore that has been achieved the bottom line, but it's not a physical activity.
I think the issue Harry's pointing out is that we're saying one thing and then not doing it and achieving it somewhere else. So we've got to be focused and be transparent about what we're actually doing and where we're saving the money. So, because it looks like we're saying one thing and then 12 months later, it's great that we've saved that money. It's brilliant, but we as councillors have got to be assured that strategically our aims are being met, not just randomly through not buying paper or something. So
I think Andy wants to comment on that.
So I was just going to say, similar to what Councillor Marcus is saying, I mean, I respect the Chief Executive's comment, but we either are charging an admin fee or we aren't.
Yep, you can only charge an admin fee once you have spent the money. So it's a technicality.
Andy?
So I think I take on board what you're saying, because there is about clarification of what we're saying and reporting here, whether a saving has been achieved or not. There's grey areas and interpretations in terms from individual managers, and this is the first time that we've done this, so we are in an iterative process in terms of that. Similar things come up when you're always tracking savings. Have you delivered it? Do you manage to the bottom line? The point I take about is the consistency, and therefore the track. So you know what we're reporting here is specifically about that activity, and I think going forward we can further define that and be clear exactly: are we reporting that activity in its specific purpose in what you've set as the budget going forward has been delivered or not? And then also, I think what would be helpful going forward is a bit more explanation is where that hasn't been achieved. A lot of the questions about what the mitigations that have been undertaken by officers to where a saving hasn't been delivered, what therefore other mitigations been put in place. And I think that's also key for members to understand exactly what else officers have done to offset that. So it's a bit more about transparency and consistency. I take that on board in terms of reporting that through.
Councillor Williams?
Yeah, it was, my query was around the strategic transitions. My understanding that the function transfers from Scilly to Cornwall in the coming weeks. And I was just wondering if all was on track, all was on schedule for that to take place smoothly.
At the moment, we keep a very close eye on the project implementation and get regular updates. The implementation and switch on, if you like, of the finance project or the finance system is definitely on green and will happen on the 1st of March. The actual cutover of the IT system is dependent on 1 or 2 elements that need to be delivered this week, but we're still hopeful it will all happen on the 26th of February as planned. It's amber greenish.
See you. Councillor Marcus.
So going back to previous discussion, in the full transparency, could maybe Mr. Dryden explain how the savings have been made in those for IP3 and IP4 in his department?
Yes, Chairman, that's really just through our management in terms of waste, both in terms of how we've been collecting and how we've been disposing of those wastes. And it's been also in terms of some of the contracts that we've also awarded as well and some of the specifications. So it's actually quite complex, and it's very difficult to actually identify absolutely things that are specific because the complexities in terms of that whole model in terms of waste management. Appreciate that probably doesn't really answer your question. And it is, say, quite a complex process. The issue in terms of the kind of grant fundings is that, you know, we have used the grant fundings absolutely effectively and efficiently because that's been obviously mainly to do with the waste management side. So what we were looking to do originally was actually utilize some of that grant funding actually towards some of the officer time in terms of just managing the project, but we have employed managers to actually manage that whole kind of program. So in many respects, those costs have actually been subject and absorbed within that process. And apart from that, I can't really give you any more detailed, specific details.
Okay, thank you. Well, yeah, looking forward to more detail next year.
Following on from Councillor Marcus's comments, I have to say, as lead member for Place, I've had very good cooperation from our lead officer to do with that. But as we were discussing prior to this meeting, it would be very helpful to get much more information than we currently receive. We cannot question and help this process if we haven't got the information. So I would ask, please, that we are much more transparent in the workings, especially over a huge budget item like our waste, so that we can all as members look at that and see where we can offer any guidance or question indeed the decisions being taken. Thank you.
Are there any more questions on this item? Right. In that case, there is a recommendation that the council notes the revenue budget monitoring. Can I have a proposer for that, please? Proposed by Councillor Smith, seconded by Councillor Marcus. All those in favour? Thank you. That's unanimous. The next item, sorry, before I move on to the next item, very remiss of me just to remind everybody in the room that we are actually on a live broadcast at the moment. I should have said so at the beginning of the meeting. My apologies for missing it out. And hopefully all council meetings in future will be on a live broadcast as well. Yes. On item 9, members, this will be a recorded vote when we come to it. Okay. Yeah, and right. So item 9 on the agenda, council budget and council tax setting. Andy?
Thank you, Chairman. So this is bringing together the culmination of previous work and reports in terms of setting a balanced budget for 2018-19, also setting out future options going forward, and then also the formal resolutions for setting the council tax for the forthcoming financial year as well. So there's some statutory sort of resolutions that we have to put in place, particularly around council tax, and those are detailed in Appendix 1. But primarily, this report goes through and sets out exactly the current financial position or forecast position, really going forward in setting a budget for 18-19. So just to take you through the reports. Largely, I was reflecting on this in terms of the position we were faced with 12 months ago. And I'm glad to say we are in a much improved financial position and an understanding of where we are and where we're going with our finances and the resilience that we have. Now, as you'll see in my commentary, particularly I think on page 18, I talk about that this shouldn't be taken for granted. This is the start of the position. I wouldn't want to be here in 12 months' time saying different things in terms of the financial position. This is the start, the introduction of the financial systems, the further improvement in monitoring the information to members to be able to make decisions for the authority in delivering its priorities. That still needs to be improved, and I do talk about that although we should be looking at the current position as an improvement, it's still one of a journey that we are going on, and we shouldn't take our focus and attention off the council's finances, which should still be priority for all concerned. So just on that note, the final settlement was announced on the 6th of February. For those that are interested, nationally, I think there was £150 million that was announced for adult social care. The Isles of Scilly received 8,000 of that, so not a great deal, but every little helps, I suppose, in that respect. We also, in the previous report, I hadn't included in the amount around the Improved Better Care Fund. So that's detailed on page 10 and 11. And details then the total resources, there's a table on page 11, paragraph 2.6, details the total level of resources, level of funding in from central government that's coming in for the financial year 2018-19. Just to raise to the attention that last year when we set the budget, there was an error in a historic setting of estimates around business rates. There is statutory return to the government called NNDR1. That was an estimate that led to a deficit of 120,000 that we're correcting this financial year. Since we've closed the accounts for 16-17 and we've been looking at the historic balances on the balance sheet, it's become clear to me that that estimate that we had a year ago, now confirmed by actuals, is actually higher in the balance sheet than we estimated. And that's why, unfortunately, we have to put in a provision this year for 170,000 to finally correct that historic error. That further backs to me, although I've got more assurances around the balances historically within the balance sheet, but in terms of my commentary, that the financial shocks to the system, whether they be demand on the services or historic balances within the balance sheet that we are still dealing with, that we shouldn't underestimate those. But in particular reference to the NNDR1 submission, I'm now reassured that we have finally dealt with that historical error going forward. It then goes on to on page 12, just to list out around the council tax base and the council tax increases proposed for 18-19. So just to confirm that going forward, there was an increase allowed in the core level of council tax increases that was allowed by government in terms of up to the referendum level. So previously that was 2%, that's now increased to 3%, so there'll be a core increase to 2.99. And then this year we'll see a proposed levy of 3% for adult social care. That's all captured out on page 12. I've just also put in for reference at the top of page 13 where the Isles of Scilly actually sits in terms of its council tax levels compared to councils within the southwest. And that is a comparison. So when you look at Devon, they have district councils, they have fire, and they obviously have the county council, and that's looking at all of those. So you can actually compare it to the same level of council tax that is being set for the Council of the Isles of Scilly. Going further then, in terms of general fund reserves, so obviously a lot of work has been undertaken in the last year to ensure that we have a level of reserves going forward that means that we are more resilient going forward and we've got a sustainable future. And we have enough to be able to deal with potential financial shocks to the system. So that, so page 13 going over to page 14 sets out the forecast position. The top of table at the top of page 14 under para 4.6 puts out my estimate of the forecast. So it takes into consideration the forecast underspend, 209,000. We've talked previously about the change in terms of the borrowing that was previously approved by councils and that being undertaken and what impact that would have on the general fund forecast. And then going forward into the financial year 2018-19, there is a proposal to draw 109,000 out of the general fund reserve to balance the budget, as well as dealing with the NNDR deficit that I previously mentioned. That's detailed in terms of section 5 and balancing the budget. Not only is it looking at the £216,000 worth of savings that have previously been reported and agreed, but it then also talks around the proposal to balance the budget by drawing from the general fund reserve of 109,000. That would still leave 1.5 million in the general fund reserve as at the end of March 2019, so the end of the next financial year. In terms of then page 16, section 6, the longer term options, it's just worth quickly noting on here that going forward, obviously in 18-19, positive in that we've reduced the structural deficit down, so there's still 109,000 being drawn out of the general fund reserve. Longer term options are detailed in 6.2 that we've previously discussed, of course, and those need to be progressed now in terms of their realistically whether they can be achieved and the timing of that. And of course, if none of those options are going to be delivered, then other options need to then be considered as well. And effectively, that will be reductions in current spend, current service levels. In terms of, lastly, my officer review, so every year the Section 151 has to give his or her assessment of the budget and the risks entailed within that. So that is detailed on pages 17, 18 and 19. Again, I would point out that the improvement in the last 12 months, it should be welcomed, but we, as I think the Vice Chair said, we shouldn't rest on our laurels. The focus should still be there. We should still be focusing on the Council's finances and its position so that we don't slip into the same position that we were in 12 months ago. In terms of risks, I've listed out at the bottom of 19 some of the significant risks that I see going forward. Clearly, the implementation of the new financial system is key, and that should be on members' watch in terms of how that progresses and the information that you're getting out of that. I know it's on the scrutiny work programme, and that's quite the right thing in terms of keeping track on how that is progressing. Mentioned about financial shocks and liabilities previously, but also there's two other areas that we should be aware of. Adult social care, clearly it's a big cost pressure for us within and a big service that is undertaken, as well as waste. So draw out those two areas that we should be mindful of as risks because of their size and because of their potential volatility that could happen that could have an impact on the council and its financial position, particularly within waste, because there's a significant level of savings that have been undertaken in 17-18. And if you look at the savings plans going forward for 18-19, there's a significant amount of savings associated with that service going forward. I think in terms of risks as well, just quickly on page 23, Appendix 2, lists out my assessment and quantification of the risks to the authority. So what I tend to do every year is to list those risks and try to put a number to those. And that for me gives me an assessment of whether we've got enough balances in the general fund reserve going forward. So the level of risk I'm saying is being financially judged at around just over £1 million. And we are forecast to have considerably over that balance going forward over the medium term. The other appendices detail a bit more service analysis and also a bit more commentary on the savings that are proposed to be delivered in 18-19. I'll leave it there, Chair. Happy to take questions.
Councillor Smith first.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you very much. That's a very comprehensive report on it. Just like to make a comment about council tax rises discussed in the previous meeting. Probably a lot of us necessary, but I think it is mindful that affecting our customers and local population service we as a council deliver information has to be used more for their products. Very pleased with about the general fund reserve. That is significant. Very good for us. Reading the risk management register is very good to see it there and to understand this. Certainly something we very much learn some potentially certain issues there. That's something to keep our eye on. With regard to Appendix 4, the savings list, discussed in previous meetings, some of these will be somewhat aspirational. So I'd like to propose a change to one of the recommendations, recommendation 6, that would be replaced with the wording of the savings list in Appendix 4, subject to a full risk assessment by the senior managers, to be brought back to full council at the next March full council.
You repeat that for clarity, please.
The savings list, Appendix 4, is subject to a full risk assessment by the senior managers, brought back to full council in March.
You want, what you're proposing that item 6 and the recommendations be replaced with your wording.
Yes, and then I'd also like to recommend propose recommendation 7, which is that the longer term savings options listed under 6.2 be brought back to full council within 6 months with a program.
Comments? Lead Member of Finance, Vice Chairman.
Thank you, Chair. If I could take your second amendment first. I think most of us, all of us around the table understand that 6.2 is already, we've already agreed to fully progress an in-depth assessment of where we are with all of these. Some of these, for example, the council tax increase on second homes, which we might look at, have actually to have ministerial approval, I understand. Therefore, all of these savings, which are aspirational at the moment, will be subject to a great deal of further work. I myself would like to amend, and I hope you might approve as part of where we're discussing your number 6 amendment, is I had hoped that we could note the planned savings for future years rather than approve them, because I would like to feel that all our options are open. So if we could perhaps ask the Section 151 officer for his comments and then come back to you.
Okay, I just want to be to sort of clarify the position. Hopefully, hopefully that will aid things. So today we're setting the budget and the council tax, and so for the 18-19 savings, the list in Appendix 4. Whilst I don't have any issue with what you're saying in terms of undertaking a risk assessment, those are the planned savings to be delivered for 18-19. So to set a balanced budget legally, we are undertaking that we are going to deliver those savings. I accept that at this point in time, there's risk in delivering those savings, but I want it to be clear that if that's coming back in March, we're not then changing those plans. There might be that there's a level of risk that they can't be delivered, but we should be looking at in terms of during the financial year and in the progressing of those savings and the tracking of how they're being delivered. What we're setting now is that these are the savings that will be delivered. I don't want there to be a perception that there's a potential for these to change at this point in time. So that's on the first sort of amendment and change the recommendation. In terms of the longer term option, again, yes, those are the ones that are going to be explored, and I think it's quite right that a progress report is brought back. That's exactly what was in the minutes previously. I think you're putting a timescale on that because the previous timescale was March, and yeah, I can only endorse that progress is made on those, because those at the moment are the longer term options, the only options that we've got on the table to progress to ensure a balanced budget beyond 18-19. But I just wanted to be certain that we're not doing anything today that might undermine the position for setting a balanced budget for 18-19, which is predicated on those Appendix 4 savings.
Okay, Councillor Marcus.
Yeah, I think we'd like to preserve, we are preserving that £215,000 savings, but we are concerned, considering where we are with the current budget and the fact that savings have happened just not because of what we've said we've agreed to do, but they've happened in service anyway. We want to know that we are sure that these things are going to happen, because some of these, we only got presented with the detail of these savings just before the meeting last month. Personally, I'm not happy where we're putting up prices and reducing services, i.e. at Porthmelon Waste plant, the site there, cutting that down to 1 day a week and putting up prices for trade waste. It doesn't really sit right with me. Also, so we want to know the achievability of those savings, basically.
Just one comment before I pass back to Councillor Brown. It may be semantics, but the savings haven't been made anyway. They have been by conscious efforts of officers to make those savings. It's not as though that they've materialised by accident, is what I'm saying.
Yes, but we were agreed, once some things were agreed to be implemented, they haven't been implemented, they've been done another
understand,
way.
But no, I just wanted to clear it, is the fact that the in-year savings that we've got, because of our previous financial position, have been managed by officers in particular, so that we have brought the savings into a greater perspective than they would have otherwise been by careful management, not by accident, that's all. Vice Chair.
Can I just say, I share your reservations about the waste site, but we're in a very difficult situation. My understanding, and I'll perhaps ask for clarification from Mr. Dryden or the lead member for place, is that if we made the difficult decision to restrict the opening hours of the waste site, then we could save from appointing one more operative who could then be deployed elsewhere. So it seems to me, although it's difficult, it's a relatively simple, not simple, in terms of service delivery and cutting frontline services is actually one of the easiest decisions to take, because it is possible, if you've got waste, I would have thought, to put a note in your diary and actually go when it's open. It's regrettable we couldn't open it for longer, but we're, to use that awful phrase, we are where we are.
Chairman, if I just kind of clarify in terms of where we are with waste management. Waste management is actually complex, and there are a number of uncertainties, not least the amount of waste that's actually obviously being created on the islands, and also we are obviously reliant on private contractors as well. But what I would say is that we are progressing with transforming how we manage our waste on these islands, and members will be aware that we're looking to introduce recycling. We will continue with campaigns to reduce and reuse waste. We're also at the stage at the moment where we're re-procuring a whole raft of waste contracts with the private sector, with revised specifications in some instances, and that's all about driving down costs and making effective and efficient savings. And also we're always continually, and we are looking to reshape operational services so that we are actually deploying our workforce so they are absolutely effective and efficient, and they are again driving down costs.
Before we progress, I'd like to welcome Lady Barclay into the meeting and just go through the formal process. Have you got any interests to declare before we continue?
I don't think on this agenda I have, unless on the matter of transport.
Okay, thank you. Right, continuing, Councillor Sims.
Regarding recommendation 7, which is Jonathan's just brought up, I have no objection at all to it being reviewed in 6 months savings. However, I would have thought that it's inherent in the process of what we're doing. It will just keep on coming. I hope it will keep on coming back to us. However, if it wants to be really explicit, that's fine. And regarding the increase in council tax, I don't really wish to say what I repeat more than what I said last time. I agree it's regrettable, but I don't think we have an option if we are asking central government to reevaluate our finances, etc., in various areas. Then we have to do it, else they will basically say go away. And on that, has there been anything back from central government re your trips up in January that you're able to talk about?
Not yet. All I was going to comment on that anyway is the fact that I know Andy Brown and myself and the chief exec are in contact with central government, and those discussions are ongoing. There's nothing tangible that I can report as yet. But yeah, however, be assured, please, that we are putting considerable pressure on the DCLG, and we await the response. Councillor Marcus.
Yes, so I just want to clarify, proposed resolution 7 is that last month we asked for the external review of management operations to begin immediately and the report be brought back to the March meeting. That still stands as far as I take it, and it's a 6-month review of the other proposals, the longer term proposals that we're asking for.
We will be bringing information back as it comes anyway, but yes, I've got no.
But a timescale definitely means it's going to happen.
Yeah, I've got no material objection to putting a time limit on it at all. However, I suspect, well, I know that information will be forthcoming before that 6 months anyway. Right, I've got Councillor Francis first.
Thank you, Chairman. Just before you deal with the recommendations, I do have another question for the 151 officer. Page 3, 2.7, you did briefly touch on this, but I don't quite fully understand what happened here. It seems to me to be quite a big mistake. And do we know how the mistake happened? Is there any information about that, please?
So a couple of things. The previous submissions to government on the statutory return NNDR1 were inaccurate. They were simply errors in terms of the estimates about the total yield of business rates and the amount of share between government and the council. So prior to last year's submission, which picked up an estimate that 240,000 was incorrect. So that's where the 120 came from. Those submissions were overestimating the amount of business rates that will be collected and therefore would have to be split under the 50% retention scheme. So errors in the returns previously for the NNDR1 submission. We then reconcile that to what actually happened. So you're forecasting forward and then in the accounts what actually happened. And the actual position was even worse than the estimate. And there is also historical balances in there in terms of provisions for appeals and reliefs and the Section 131 grants that come into it, which compounded the position over a number of years. So a couple of factors really: errors in the submissions and returns, and not dealing with historical balances in what we term as the collection fund, where we're collecting business rates and paying it over to government. That these balances are built up over time, and we're now having to deal with that in this submission.
Can I just come back and ask, there's no recompense then from government? The fact is, because these errors were made, we have to deal with this, and, you know, despite the fact that it's wrong, we just say goodbye to this cash then. Yeah.
So, yep, they're our errors. It's our responsibility. It's our data. It's our submission. It's our return. This has cost government as well as costing us, because it's split 50-50.
Councillor Guy.
I'll take it, yes, Chairman. Andy, on 8.24, judicial review for the public record, if there was one, would there be much of a cost to this authority, do you know?
Can I chip on that one? The minimum cost of a judicial review to any local authority is estimated at around about £50,000.
Thank you for that answer.
Councillor Williams.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, I just had two observations, one relating to the discussion about reducing the opening hours of the Morwell Waste site. And I'd like I had the pleasure of being down there the other day, and even with the hours we've got at the moment, I'm just very conscious we've got a lot of very big lorries using a very, very narrow lane with lots of very careful manoeuvring required. And at certain times of the day, that's also a thoroughfare for children and young people going to and from school. So I'm just aware that if we're reducing the opening hours, it could put extra volume on that particular area of St Mary. So I'd ask the council team just to monitor the road safety, community safety aspects at the same time as we're reducing the opening hours potentially. And also I just wanted to recognise that we've got a levy for adult social care, and staff have been nominated for an award recently, so to congratulate them on that and wish them well at their award ceremony in the future.
Councillor Groddick.
Thank you, Chair. If I could ask the 151 officer a question, please, and turn to the page 11 of the small numbers, which at 8.16, currently when considering all reserves available, the level of coverage 18-19 will be over 2 million. And yet, if you turn back 2 pages to page 6, the general fund reserve forecast is 1,509,000. So could you please explain the discrepancy in the figures, please?
Yes, certainly. So when I was considering, I think the key point is considering all reserves available. So yes, we have a general fund reserve, which is effectively to deal with unforeseen financial shocks and our resilience. That's what's detailed on 4.6. So going into 18-19, the estimated balance is around 1.788 million. That is going to reduce then to 1.5. But when, in terms of looking at my statement there, considering all reserves, so that we do have other earmarked reserves. So if you remember previously bolstering the general fund, we actually took specific grants and earmarked reserves out and put that into the general fund. We still have earmarked reserves left. So when I'm considering all other reserves, yes, there are some that are ring fenced that we can't touch, but when considering all reserves open to us, then we have coverage of over 2 million, and that's hence my statement there. So yes, we do have the general fund reserve, but there are also earmarked reserves. Now, just a quick thing on earmarked reserves, obviously they've been put aside for a specific purpose, whether it's airport asset management, whether it's for housing. So they are designed and put aside for a specific purpose. So it's a very last resort, which we had to do last financial year, to take money out of earmarked reserves to bolster the general fund. But when considering the worst case position, that's exactly what I'm referring to in 8.16.
Thank you.
Councillor Marcus.
Yeah, just like to just reiterate what I said last month about being uncomfortable about the raising council tax and how I felt it was more of a political manoeuvre from central government to raise taxes without being seen to do so, as stated last month. And just to make members aware and to have some sympathy, I guess, with Mr. Dryden about the amount of savings he's got to make in his budget this year. It's considerably larger than any other department. So that's going to need careful looking at and support as well from lead members and from all members. And I don't think anyone else has, but second the proposals made by Councillor Smith for the amended resolutions 6 and 7.
Okay. Are there any more comments before I move on to? Oh, carry on.
Thank you, Chairman. I would just like to, before the amendments and so on are taken and voted on, I would just like to draw members and officers' attention to our 151 officers' penultimate sentence and 8.27 I'm talking about on page 12. I have to say that I've had to be brought kicking and screaming here to actually agree this budget today. I realise it has to be done, but I'm extremely uncomfortable about borrowing to fund our deficit. I think we have to work extremely hard if we agree this budget today to find further savings and indeed further income for this council so that we can have a proper balanced budget in 2019-2020. We've had no time, Chairman, to deal with this budget properly this year. We've a new council. We've had, it's not the 151 officer's fault. He has been excellent in this process, but we only received this detail on Monday. We have very difficult decisions to make, and I would hope that we have more timely information in future and we start next year's budget process a lot earlier, please, so that we can have proper debate around it and actually agree the outcomes with more time. Thank you, Chairman.
Just as a word of reassurance, Councillor Francis, is that we are fully expecting to go back onto a normal budget cycle next year. The new systems that will be implemented that the Chief Executive alluded to will enable us to do that. Not making excuses, we were in a mess. And that mess has had knock-on effects, in particularly about timings over not just this year but previous years. If you, those that were members of council last year, remember that as far as our timings this year is concerned, we're probably in a luxurious state compared with the previous year. That doesn't excuse anything. However, next year we should be back onto a normal cycle. Before I move on, I'll just ask if there are any more questions before I move on to the proposals. Matt?
Can I just clarify, please, Chair, what's proposed in relation to recommendation 6? Because I think originally it was put as an alternative, but I think listening to the discussion, I think what you're saying is that you keep recommendation 6, but add to it that the savings listed in Appendix 2 be subject to a full risk assessment by senior managers and brought back in March, yeah? Okay. Thanks.
Is that correct? Okay. Is that correct, Councillor Smith? Is that?
Yes, no, listening to discussion, I think that is the best way forward.
What I'll do when we come to recommendation 6, I will ask Andy to read it out if possible. Or Matt, have you made notes on that, Matt? You did. Good man. Thank you. I'll ask Matt to read it back out as a full proposal. Yeah, Vice Chair.
If I could just say that I would like to amend item 6 from change the wording from approved to noted.
Can I say, so, because obviously the recommendation has gone into change 6 effectively. monitoring officer can correct me if I'm wrong. But 6 is effectively in relation to 6.2, the longer term options. We are approving the savings because the savings have already been approved effectively at the January meeting for 215,000 on Appendix 4. I'm comfortable with what, in terms of the clarification that Councillor Marcus provided in that it was a surety around that the savings are happening, not about any changes in setting the budget at this stage. And it was, that recommendation was more about, yes, we approve the savings, but it's the surety around the risk of them not being delivered or other things happening around it, as we've seen in this financial year. So I think that distinction is helpful because, yes, we're approving Appendix 4, and maybe that's something that we need to add into the recommendation just to be clear, but you're still saying that needs to be a full risk assessment in terms of understanding it and providing you with assurance around the delivery. Then the longer term option, as you say, is for that progress report on all the longer term options to be progress report to come back in 6 months.
Are you okay with that, Vice Chair?
Yes, I'm happy to stand corrected. I can see the rationale for that. In fact, I agree with Councillor Marcus. It was more that we should ensure that we had the time to actually monitor as we progress, and I think we now will. So thank you very much, everyone.
Okay. If you're all comfortable with the amount of discussion we've had, I intend to move on to the proposals and take them one by one. These will be recorded votes. Recommendation 1, that the council tax requirement for the council's own purpose be set at 1.643 million, and the council of the Isles of Scilly's element of the council tax be increased by 2.99% plus a levy of 3% to be spent solely on adult social care for the financial year 2018-19, an overall increase of 5.99% equivalent to a Band D charge of 1,239.98. Can I have a proposer, please? Proposed by Councillor Mumford, seconded by Councillor Sims. Do you want to take the vote, please?
I think if you go around from you clockwise and say your name and which way you want to vote, and it's easy for me to minute then.
Fine.
That'd be all right.
Councillor Grottick.
Frank Grottick, I support the recommendation.
Councillor Sims.
4.
Councillor Nellams.
4.
Councillor Williams. 4. Councillor Guy.
4.
Councillor Mumford.
4.
Councillor Marcus.
4.
Councillor Smith.
4.
Councillor Legg.
4.
Councillor Francis.
4.
Lady Barclay.
4.
Councillor Watt. 4. Councillor Davis.
4.
And for the record, I'm 4 as well. That was unanimous, thank you. Recommendation 2, that net general fund revenue budget for 18-19 of 4.971 million be set. Councillor Grottick.
4.
Oh, sorry. Sorry, I haven't got a proposal here.
Yeah.
Proposed by Councillor Marcus, seconded by Councillor Grottick. Councillor Grottick.
4.
Councillor Sims.
4.
Councillor Nellams.
4.
Councillor Williams. 4. Councillor Guy.
4.
Councillor Mumford.
4.
Councillor Marcus.
4.
Smith. Councillor
4.
Smith. Councillor Legg.
4.
Councillor Francis.
4.
Lady Barclay.
4.
Councillor Watt. 4. Councillor Davis.
4.
And for the record, I am 4 as well. Item 3, recommendation number 3, that the formal council tax resolution set out in Appendix 1 be approved. Can I have a proposer for this, please? Councillor Mumford, a seconder. Councillor Smith. Here we go again. Councillor Grottick.
4.
Councillor Sims.
4.
Councillor Nellams.
4.
Councillor Williams. 4. Councillor Guy.
4.
Councillor Mumford.
4.
Councillor Marcus. Councillor Smith. 4. Councillor Legg.
4.
Councillor Francis.
4.
Councillor Lady Barclay.
4.
Councillor Watt. 4. Councillor Davis. 4. And for the record, I'm 4 as well. Recommendation number 4, that the relevant basic amount of council tax for the 2018-19 financial year be determined as being in accordance with referendums relating to council tax increases (principles England) 2018-19. Can I have a proposer, please? Councillor Guy, seconded by Councillor Grottick. Councillor Grottick.
For.
Sorry.
Councillor Sims, Councillor Nellams.
For.
Councillor Williams. Councillor Guy.
For.
Councillor Mumford.
For.
Councillor Marcus.
For.
Councillor Smith.
For.
Councillor Legg.
For.
Councillor Francis.
For.
Councillor Lady Barclay.
For.
Councillor Watt. Councillor Davis. And for the record, I'm for as well. Recommendation number 5. Can I have a proposer, please? Councillor Legg, seconded by Councillor Mumford. Right, Councillor Grottick.
For.
Councillor Sims.
For.
Councillor Nellams.
For.
Councillor Williams. For. Councillor Guy.
For.
Councillor Mumford.
For.
Councillor Marcus.
For.
Councillor Smith. For. Councillor Legg.
For.
Councillor Francis.
For.
Councillor Lady Barclay.
For.
Councillor Watt. For. Councillor Davis. And for the record, I am for. Right, item 6. Matt, can you possibly read out the motion as you understand it, please?
Yeah, so to ensure that Section 151 officer has what he needs, I think it is that the planned savings for future years be approved to form the basis of planning for the medium term, and that the savings listed in Appendix 4 be subject to a full risk assessment by senior managers and brought back to full council in March.
Is that what you understand, Councillor Smith?
Yes, I'm happy with that. Thank you.
That's fine. Can I have a proposer, please? Councillor Smith. Seconded. I've only done it because the wording might be very slightly different than it was. Councillor Smith proposed, Councillor Marcus seconded. Are you happy with that? As it stands, as the monitoring officers just read out. Yeah. Okay. And we've got a proposer and a second. Councillor Grottick.
For.
Councillor Sims.
For, and I haven't just been informed by Mr. Stokes that we could have done this en bloc, which might well be worth remembering for next year.
Yeah, I thought it valuable to start with, but it's now getting tedious. I agree with you. Councillor Nellams.
For.
Councillor Williams. For. Councillor Guy.
For.
Councillor Mumford.
For.
Councillor Marcus.
For.
Councillor Smith. For. Councillor Legg.
For.
Councillor Francis.
For.
Councillor Lady Barclay.
For.
Councillor Watt. Councillor Davis. And for the record, I am for. We have a proposed and seconded item 7. Monitoring officer, can you read out what you understand it is, please?
I think it is that the longer term savings options in paragraph 6.2 of the report be brought back to full council in 6 months with a progress report.
Can I make a very small amendment to say within 6 months?
Within 6 months. We've got that proposed. Have we got a seconder? Councillor Marcus. Right, here we go again. Councillor Grottick.
For.
Councillor Sims. Councillor Nellams.
For.
Councillor Williams. Councillor Guy.
For.
Councillor Mumford.
For.
Councillor Marcus.
For.
Councillor Smith. For. Councillor Legg.
For.
Councillor Francis.
For.
Councillor Lady Barclay.
For.
Councillor Watt. Councillor Davis. And for the record, I am for. That's that one dealt with. Thank you very much indeed. We move on to agenda item 10. Lisa.
Thank you, Chair. This is a report outlining the content of the draft local plan for members to approve the commencement of the public consultation. The requirement for members to sign off on the draft plan and publicly consult on it is in line with statutory requirements, our statement of community involvement and our adopted local plan timetable. Officers have progressed the local plan in consultation with members through the local plan working group and is considered now at this draft stage to open up the plan to public consultation. Members will note that the required sustainability appraisal is awaited and any significant amendments to the plan as a result of this work will be reported to members at the next meeting. It is not envisaged, however, that this will result in significant amendments. Any questions?
I'd just like to point out that we all realise that this is a mighty tome and that we have done considerable work on this at the moment, and this is not necessarily to discuss the contents of this now. This is literally just to push it out for public consultation. So we're not discussing the actual contents of it at the moment. Okay, Councillor Marcus.
Yeah, I'd like to thank officers and all members that have taken part in the meetings. We've had lots of discussion, some of it easy, some of it not so easy, about the contents of the local plan, and I would urge members of the public to read it and ask questions about anything they don't understand and any opinions they have on it, and feed that back into the process. It's a really important document. It's going to shape how the islands look for the next 10 to 15 years. One of the most important documents that we have produced as a council. So with that, I'd just like to, propose the recommendations.
Thank you. Councillor Smith?
Yeah, I'd like to agree with everything Councillor Marcus says, and I think we as councillors and officers should be very proactive in engaging the public in this document. I'd like to just ask one question for clarification on recommendation 2, where it says members delegate to the senior manager the authority to make any necessary revisions as required. Do you mean after the public consultation?
No, it was, we will make the amendments as we see necessary, but then report them back to the March committee to say these are the amendments we've made.
This is for the sustainability, the result of the sustainability report.
Can I also add something? This is a long document for the public to comment on and to read. I have done, which will circulate to members, a summary version of this, which summarises all the policies of the plan, which will be available for people if they want to engage with it and then read further. They can. This is much shorter, sort of less than 20 pages.
Councillor Smith.
And can I also just ask what the plan is, in assuming we approve this, obviously, to actually engage the public? How we will actually put it out there? What is there any workshops going on, that sort of thing?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm going to recall the working group together to set out what the consultation arrangements are proposed, when, how long, drop-in sessions, how we're going to, engage the community. So that will be subject to another local plan working group meeting before the public consultation commences.
Are there any more comments? You propose that? Yeah. And it was seconded by Councillor Smith, is that correct? Yeah. Right. In the absence of any other comments, I'll take it straight to the vote. All those in favour of recommendations 1 and 2? That's unanimous. Thank you. Agenda item 11, interim specific local needs. Lisa?
Thank you, Chair. This is a report outlining the revocation process and requirements to move away from the current qualifying criteria for properties that are subject to occupancy restrictions for specific local need and key worker. Officers are recommending that the current criteria, which are set out in supplementary planning documents, are now revoked and the emerging local plan qualifying criteria is adopted as an interim policy position until the new local plan is adopted.
I see this as something that we've got to do because we're in the process of adopting a new local plan and we do need interim qualification for that before the new local plan is actually fully adopted. Are there any questions? No question? Oh, sorry.
Well, just say it clearly needed to be revised. This revised system strikes me as much more effective, and I'd like to recommend the proposal.
All three?
Yeah.
Is there a seconder? Councillor Mumford? Sorry, do you want to comment, Councillor Smith?
Yeah, just had a clarification. I think there's a minor typo on LC2. Bear with me a moment. So on 4B,
what page are you on?
Sorry, page 189, policy LC2. On 4B, should it not say is currently employed by the Armed Forces or Merchant Navy?
Right, yeah. Anything else before I move it to the vote? Councillor Smith?
Yeah, I did want to just ask about the, in paragraph 1.2 regarding the changes to section 106 agreements. What, in terms of modifying existing 106 agreements, what would be the costs involved for the people who have those agreements that need to be modified?
I don't know. Yeah, I mean, there is a cost involved for anyone applying to modify their existing 106, and that's the staff costs of drawing the revised 106. It's around £160 if someone did want to amend their own 106.
But it's not something that has to be done? Is it?
Not for those properties that currently have a specific local need or key worker as part of their 106. As you can see from the appendix, there are lots of variations, some of which are specific local need and key worker, some of which are other. So it really only affects those with specific local need and key worker. If anyone else wants to amend their 106 to include specific local need and key worker, then those are the people who would have to apply anyway, regardless of this change.
I suppose what I'm driving at is that are we effectively forcing costs on people with on some people with existing 106 agreements?
I don't think we are, no, because they don't have to get these changes. They will already be. What's the word I'm looking for? These changes affect existing 106s where they've already got specific local need and key worker. We're not forcing those people to change their own 106.
Chairman, just very briefly, as we're revoking current policy and definitions, that will actually revert back by default actually into the new planning, into the old planning obligations. So there won't necessarily be a requirement to actually amend or revise those planning obligations. Having said that, members of the public who wish to modify their planning obligations to ensure clarity in terms of making sure that it is absolutely compliant with the current criteria can absolutely do so. And obviously one of the reasons for the charge is that we also have to go through the land registry as well. So there are some statutory charges that we need to absolve as a local authority, and it's really important that we do any form of administration on a cost recovery basis.
Yes, talking about the 106s, what is the state of play with the unsigned ones? They're in red here, sorry, page 184.
Yeah, the top ones.
186.
The two top ones they are just with the applicants waiting for them to sign their recently approved developments. Yeah, there are a couple that have slipped through the net, which we have been chasing for the last couple of years for them to sign their agreements. And I think there are two on the list that are still outstanding.
With the change in the 106, is that going to, are they going to keep slipping through the net? Or will they have to sign this?
No, nobody has to sign anything for those changes to take effect. Nobody has to sign anything, no. The outstanding ones will be drawn up in accordance with the new criteria anyway.
Right, okay.
Chairman, can I just retrospectively declare an interest? I've just noticed on page 185 that a family member owns one of the properties mentioned, but as I haven't said anything or contributed, I don't think that's...
Yeah, I'd just like to thank the officer for a very in-depth paper showing the history of the key worker and the specific local need and how that the process needed changing. Also listing out 106 houses and just showing that actually there's only 8% of properties on the island that are affected by 106. So it's not a huge amount, but obviously it's very resonant with people and creates a lot of discussion in the community. So simplifying the process is something that we were very keen to do. Again, I'd like to second, I think the proposal's already been proposed, recommendations rather, so I'd second those. I'd like to second those.
Is there any more comment before I move on to the vote? Matt, monitoring officer.
Can I just say that in relation to Councillor Williams, I think given the nature of the information that's in there and the decisions being made, I don't think an interest arises.
Any more comment? I intend to take all three recommendations as one then in that case. We have a proposer and a seconder. All those in favour? That's unanimous. Thank you very much. Item 12, education outcomes. Keith, do you want a microphone? Yeah. Do you want to come to the...
Good morning. I'm doing this a bit of a double act. I've got Keith here to do some of the more technical analysis work with you, but I thought I'd give you some strategic overview. So this report comes annually and it used to come to Children's Committee. So for those of you who are new or didn't sit on Children's Committee, just kind of want to go back a bit because it is always complex, seemingly, to explain the role of a local authority in education. So we have a range of education functions. We don't run schools. So schools run themselves, they're autonomous bodies with their own governing body. But local authorities have a duty to secure good educational outcomes across their local authority area using a variety of tools. So if I was presenting a similar report in Cornwall, I would give you the education outcomes for all children in Cornwall, and we might do some analysis by special groups that we were concerned with, say children with special educational needs or disabilities. We might look at a boy-girl split. We might look at children who are financially disadvantaged, but you would never ever get to a school-specific level. And then also you probably would risk assess the schools in your area according to those sort of probably like a traffic light system, schools causing concern, schools where you're a bit worried, seeing some slightly worrying data, and then schools where you've got no risk at all. Ofsted are saying they're outstanding and their data shows that they're kind of chugging along quite well. And then elected members will say to the person who's presenting that report, what are you doing for those schools causing concern? So we have one school and it is a school that causes concern. And so today you need to ask us what we're doing to support that school. We do not recruit teachers. We do not performance management teachers. Essentially, the tools available to a local authority are around, it's all set out in guidance. So you can send warning letters, which we have done, based on data, and you have to have data evidences why you're concerned. So our concern, when we wrote that letter, for those of you who remember, was that at Key Stage 2, over 3 years, you could see that the school was falling below floor targets and was therefore meeting the definition of a coasting school. So we sent a warning letter. We also did a deep dive in school to understand exactly what was going on in the classroom. We wrote a set of recommendations. So we can recommend, but we cannot do. The people that can do is Ofsted, who came in very shortly after that, who said this school is in special measures, therefore the academy order was issued. We also then, the schools at its highest risk, we were then in a position where we could ask government if we could constitute an interim executive board where the local authority takes over the governance of the school, and that's what we've done. So currently schools at the highest level of intervention. Ofsted have since come back because there's been a delay in the academy process, and they are seeing lots of green shoots of recovery. The data you're seeing today relates to last summer. So last summer, you had the interim executive board in place for about 5-6 months and the head teacher in place for about 2 months. You wouldn't expect to see rapid improvement in that time frame in any situation. So this year's data, which you'll see next February, because you can only see moderated data, should show, we believe from all the evidence we've seen and Ofsted have seen and everything we do in terms of tracking, should show improvements. But currently the school is coasting, but there aren't other methodologies available to us to do any more. And we believe that the IEB is doing a good job, and that's been endorsed by Ofsted. So that's the kind of overarching picture. But if you have any specific questions on the data or anything on the academy process, then feel free to ask us.
Any questions? Councillor Williams.
Thank you, Chairman. When talking with officers about this report, I specifically asked for a warts and all approach, and I think that's what we've got. I think there are some elements which are pleasing, but it's probably Key Stage 2 I'll try and drill down into in just a moment. Ashling didn't mention the Regional Schools Commissioner, who, weather permitted, should be here on Monday, and there's another opportunity to explore potentially some of the discussions that take place this morning with that individual. But I just also wanted to make reference to the fact that I and I know other members of staff visited the St Mary's base relatively recently, and I thought we got a very good impression from both the students who showed us around and the teachers. I can't profess to be an Ofsted inspector, but I felt the students were proud of their establishment and put on a very good discussion about how they felt their learning was going. But it's around Key Stage 2 where we seem to be consistently, year on year, in my understanding, failing to get anywhere near national average. Obviously, we want to be far above it. So I'd just like to ask, what are we doing to try and sort of rectify that?
So what we are doing is we are appointing an interim executive board who have an action plan in place which addresses actions that need to be taken at Key Stage 2 to improve teaching and learning, and that's what we're doing. And we have also, in the past, we have offered additional resource for primary improvement work, but that's all we can do as a local authority. You're very entitled as elected members, as individuals, to have a meeting with the head teacher where you can ask specifically what is the school itself doing in terms of Key Stage 2. But what you can ask me in this forum is what is the local authority doing in relation to its school improvement duties. And in relation to our school improvement duties, we've done everything possible at the maximum level of intervention. We've got direct governance of the school. We're supporting the new academy sponsor.
I'd just like to add a comment, is the fact that the Vice Chair and myself went down and met the head and also got very positive vibes. We did ask specific questions about pieces of work that were going on to support Key Stage 2 and what have you, and there was a lot of positivity around that, certainly. Councillor Marcus first.
Yeah, I would like, in terms of just this process, the stats seem to be very detailed, but also quite impenetrable as well. So there's a lot of numbers in there. I've been looking out for minus numbers and things with no entry signs, and Key Stage 2 obviously has loads of no entry signs by them, so those are markers, and also Key Stage 1 as well. That's not great. You know, in terms of being a councillor, I'm not accepting that we're below national average. We should be aiming for above national average. So I would like to take assurance from you guys that you are pushing the IEB to make sure that that's actually happening. And in terms of our duty, what specific things are in place? I'm talking actual operational specific things that you are doing to, in terms of supporting the IEB and making sure that they're, you know, are you looking at their action plan? Are you?
So we monitor their action plan and their delivery as essentially the governing body of the school. And the key function they have is to hold the head teacher to account, and the head teacher has a whole action plan. So that is regularly monitored and they're doing that. We also have a Section 8 inspection from Ofsted, which took place in November. And thank you, Councillor Legg, for correcting my dates. And that endorses that the interim executive board is doing absolutely everything that they can do in order to secure improvements in that school. So we have absolutely no reason to believe that any actions we can take need amending or adapting.
Okay, thank you. And just the IEB, because the IEB is met out, or the cost of the IEB is met out of council budgets, and it was first envisaged that the IEB would only run for a certain period, and that has now gone on and on and on. Are we looking to recover costs from the Regional Schools Commissioner?
We asked for that. There is no funding route to achieve that. It's regrettable that the conversion process has taken so long, but Keith and I were pretty much aware that we might be in this situation, and we budgeted quite significantly for school improvement work. So we have met it within existing budgets. Yeah, well, looking at the target date remains next week, but it's likely to be the beginning of April. So we're looking at 1 month more potentially of supporting the interim executive board. We've met it within existing budget.
Councillor Sims.
Yes, 1.14.3.4 on line 3, halfway down the page. It's below the national average on the 99th centile is quite horrifying, really. It puts us in the bottom 100. And I understand that this was not the school as is. And it's perhaps the issue I have with this report, and it's not really anybody's fault. It's just that the school is significantly below. And it's the is that's a problem here, because it looks worse than perhaps it is, because the school now, as I gather from the Ofsted report, is making significant progress and is improving. So, but anybody reading, it's quite easy to read this and think it's confusing was and is, if you get my drift. And I do think that things are improving. I've spoken to, well, she's not a head, is she? But a head of school anyway. I'm not quite sure what her role is. And it was a very positive conversation, and she seems quite hopeful that the school is moving forward. But perhaps more importantly, so do Ofsted. So, but things can only get better, really.
I thank you for that. And yeah, I agree with you. This is a historical document going back to July last year. It's not the current situation. Councillor Francis.
Thank you, Chairman. I'd like to thank the senior officer for arranging for some of us to go and have a look around the school. I attended with Councillor Williams and Councillor Mumford and Councillor Smith, and it was very helpful. However, I have to say we have a report here which is not glossy. It's really worrying in Key Stage 1 and especially Key Stage 2. I hear what has been said about the fact that this is historic. However, we do not know how much progress has been made and whether or not we are still letting our children down. And what I would like to point out, which is very concerning to me, is that there are a number of parents in our community who are considering moving from Scilly because they are very concerned about the education of their children. And that, Chairman, I believe is a very, very important matter. And I would welcome our senior officer to possibly arranging for concerned parents, especially in Key Stage 2, possibly not just to go and meet the headmaster, maybe the headmistress can actually have a workshop with them or whatever and actually try and reassure them as to where she has got to compared with what we're seeing here, please.
Okay, we've got to be really, again, it's just about roles and responsibilities. So the Interim Executive Board has held regular events with parents, have been very well attended and been live streamed, and we've had very strong attendance from off-island parents and so on. So the Interim Executive Board is who we, as a local authority, so when we talk about we in this room, yes, there is concern in the community about educational outcomes, but what we've got to discuss here today is what the local authority can do to make that better. So we have got a very, very strong Interim Executive Board, and we ask government to appoint that. It's quite a big deal for local authorities to take direct control of the governance of the school. We've got two national leaders of governance, one of whom was Governor of the Year for Cornwall in 2016, two ex-heads of outstanding schools, and someone from the diocese who's got a strong record in education. If you read the Ofsted reports, it's incredibly positive about the impact of governance on driving teaching and learning in the school. So within this forum, you need to be assured today that what we've done as your local authority officers is enough. We can't do anything more in terms of operational stuff. If parents would like to have meetings about Key Stage 2 with the head teacher, they will need to organise that and get in touch with the IEB who can make that happen. But it's not for us as a local authority to organise. But the IEB have had a series of meetings with parents to reassure them about the process. On Monday, the Regional Schools Commissioner is coming, so I've let members know that there's an opportunity for you to meet with her, because obviously, if in the summer, and you look at the data next year, if in the summer results don't improve, we will have the same meeting, and the outcome of that, if we do not believe things have improved, will be to write to the Regional Schools Commissioner. So that's going to be a really important part of our relationship in the future. It's just been really, really clear. And I would just say that in the past, before I started in this post, the local authority intervened in inappropriate ways in the running of the school with no evidence and outside statutory guidance. So I'm protecting our position, and I'm just kind of getting us into a discipline that we are about the function of school improvement. We get our own Ofsted inspection specifically on that. Every conversation we've had with Ofsted so far think that we, as in exercising that function, we do a pretty good job. That is separate from whether or not the school follows through on those recommendations as given to them by us. That's their job, you see. So.
Councillor Marcus.
Just to improve our understanding of the stats, I would like to ask for next year, before you present the stats, it's a workshop, so we can ask questions on specific things, because it is a lot of numbers, there's a lot of graphs, a lot of pretty colours, but actually, and seeing as next year, hopefully there will be a marked increase. We need to know that that's a real increase rather than just a anomaly in some way. So if you could arrange that for next year, that'd be great.
Yeah, and I think partly also we did used to bring it to Children's Committee, which was obviously had just over time developed, had got used to looking at moderated data and so on. So you're absolutely right, we can turn it into a presentation. I think Keith did that actually for staff recently as well. So you can have one. You can have one. Of course you can.
Councillor Mumford.
Yes, I'd like to ask the senior manager, is it possible for us to have an update on Key Stage 2 in about, well, maybe at the end of this term? Is that possible for us to ask for that?
No. It's not what we do is we look at educational outcomes and the moderated data that comes out sort of January, February is when we've done it annually. That's when we can, as a local authority, look at it. The IEB.
I think the Key Stage 2 is of concern.
Absolutely. I know it is of concern, but the business of council is to make sure that the council is doing everything it can to improve Key Stage 2. It's not to track and monitor it. That's not what you do. That's what an IEB does and a school does.
Okay.
That's just not what happens.
I'll come to you, Councillor Williams.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Obviously, the data in here very much relates to school-aged children, young people on Scilly, but 1.1 makes reference to post-16 students in terms of travel and accommodation funding. Are we able to get any sort of broad approach on how education outcomes are for post-16 cohorts?
Key Stage 5 data is challenging because students are scattered to the four corners of Cornwall and state boarding schools around the country. It has been internal, we can provide internal destinations data from where students finish their Key Stage 5 and where they go on to, but we can't provide data on actual A-level outcomes because it's a diverse pot. You know, we can make aggregated comments on our cohort of Key Stage 5, but we can look at present data on outcomes on destinations.
Councillor Nellams.
Yeah, in 11442, there's just a very telling little sentence, and I wondered how much of an impact it has on the Key Stage 2 results performance. It's the second part about the result of the poor curriculum design that failed to take into account the new performance measures. And I wondered, because that had been slightly missed out, that those results were much, much lower than we're all expecting, when if that had been corrected or done properly at the time, it might have helped a lot and brought those back up.
And that's partly the issue. It's a lot about progress. And that's now what everyone looks at with schools. So headline figures for the islands have often been very good, but actually it doesn't, but underlying that is the progress. So where would children have got to regardless? So that's the whole thing now, is what is the value added bit that teaching and learning puts in? And that's the bit where the school has been challenged. Everything we see when we track what the IEB is doing, everything we see is that the appropriate actions are being taken to improve significantly outcomes across all key stages. We have no belief that that's not being done. And we really, you know, you've got to remember we are in a small community. And I think actually I'd like to say that the hard work going on in that school to turn things around is to be lauded. And that's from the children and the adults.
So
sorry, Councillor Lake. All right, Councillor Marcus.
Thank you very much. Is there any chance, I know these stats are annual, is there any chance of doing an in-year update at all? It's in terms of, because Key Stage 2, there's obviously concern about Key Stage 2.
So there is internal data on Key Stage 2. So children are sitting assessments all the time. So that's part of the new kind of rigor that's going on in school. Children are sitting assessments and their parents will be updated on it, and regularly management teams look at that stuff. It would not normally be appropriate to be sharing that with the local authority. That's internal mechanisms. The local authority's data essentially is what comes through the Fisher Family Trust and looked at on an annual basis.
I think what I get the feeling that members are saying is that there is a lot of concern as far as members are concerned, and we just like to be kept abreast of the situation on an ongoing basis. Is that the feeling I'm getting from the meeting at the moment?
You've also got to remember that this will not be a local authority school within the next couple of months. So actually all we'll have is the annual stuff. It is an extremely significant part of our community, and I think it would be remiss of us as an authority and the elected members not to be kept informed of that. Is it possible to keep us informed? Okay, I think I really genuinely, there is not a basis in which a local authority can sit and scrutinise the assessment data for children. It's just not what would happen anywhere. So all you can ask is that are measures in place. So you've got an interim executive board and you've got an academy sponsor starting. That they are the only available actions to the local authority. I know you're concerned and you've taken everything that's possible. You've done everything possible, and that's it. So now we have to then wait and see if those measures are going to then pull through it into more positive outcomes.
I think you missed the point I was getting at. I think it's just an open channel to keep us informed of the progress of the school. That's all.
Yeah, and I'm just trying to think how I evidence progress, because all I have that I can share is annual data for all the key stages. That's all the only data I can share with you. I'm just trying to think what I can actually do in terms of progress.
Is there something we can do with, because obviously when it goes to an academy, there's going to be a local governance board of some description. Is there something we can do? Obviously, yeah, I don't know.
I therefore request that either you and I or Keith and what have you sit down and just examine this subject and see what we can do as far as communicating the progress of the school is concerned, so that elected members can have some sort of communication if it is possible. Okay. Right, Councillor Francis.
Well, thank you, Chairman. Well, that will be progress because, you know, we're in a cleft stick here. The recommendation is that members scrutinise the role of the local authority in exercising its education duty.
I think,
basically,
okay, I was going to come on to that.
We're not actually being able to do it.
I don't think we can actually scrutinise it. I'll be quite frank with you. I think we can note.
Well, that's what the recommendation is.
I know. I was going to comment on that.
What you need to do has your team services done what it needs to do. So what I'm saying to you is what we've done is we've sent warning letters, we've got resource, we put in a brand new governing body, and we're supporting conversion to the academy sponsor. So what you guys should say is that acceptable to you? Have you got some other strategies that we can do to drive improvement? That's what you're scrutinising is the policy of school improvement function. I don't know, I thought you remembered this when you were lead member.
Could I just make a suggestion that I think that we need to, the council as a whole, need to build a relationship with the new head and the acting head that's here, so that we have a good relationship with them, that we're not badgering them, but so that we can perhaps have some information direct from them that things are going well. I know we can't interfere, and I'm sure that our senior managers have done their, you know, they've done their best. But actually, I just feel that there should be, try and build a relationship with the head
just like to reassure you that myself and the vice chair have already kicked that process off.
Yes, and I think that's good.
It's something that we will continue to maintain.
And actually, going back to just a point, because we were told that we, in the scrutiny committee, that we could not scrutinise the school. But actually we can, because I have checked this.
It's about who you call in.
Yeah.
Right.
I think that's a really great idea. I think what we've got to remember is that the school is a bit like the health centre and the hospital and police, they're another strategic partner. So as part of the process for academisation, we've actually written a partnership agreement to recognise the unique role of our one school in this small community in all sorts of ways, and that actually a good school is what will keep families here, and a poor school will do the reverse.
agree.
So it's vital in terms of sustainability. So we're actually, Keith and I drafted something that will actually go to the Regional Schools Commissioner. I would urge you as elected members to come and meet the Regional Schools Commissioner to underline that point and how it's really, really unfortunate that the sponsorship has taken so long. Don't forget, we've been left with this now for 18 months. The speed of that has been really poor. So the Regional Schools Commissioner, I recommend members has their ear chewed off a bit about that on Monday afternoon. I think, again, remind them how important it is to families here that you might look at depopulation, and Councillor Francis has already said we are absolutely aware that families have left the island in pursuit of better educational outcomes. Absolutely. Your local authority has spent significant amounts of money in holding that school together and by paying for governance. And I think we can find really good partnership ways of engaging with the head teacher. She sits on the Children's Trust board, so again, that's really important. And as Councillor, as the chairman says, he's had meetings too, and so will our lead member. They are a significant partner. All I'm trying to do today is protect the local authority position, that what we say and do as a local authority in relation to education is absolutely appropriate. So I want you to be satisfied that we're discharging our duties legally and well. And maybe Mr. Stokes could help me out here, because he'll have gone to equivalent reports by the Cornwall County Council team. I've never said that school can't go to scrutiny. It's about what you can scrutinise legitimately as a local authority. Because we've just got to remember that we're not actually in charge of teaching and learning. We can just make recommendations about how to improve it. And in the past, local authorities got into really, really poor position, and where the Minister, the Secretary of State, wrote to the local authority with a big rap over the knuckles about how involved it got in operational level. So that's just trying to protect us.
I think it's really just that we would like information that things are improving on a continuous basis.
What I will do is I will organise, I will talk to the committee, and I'll see if I can ask Jackie Ethan, who is the chairman of the interim executive board, to come along and do an informal workshop for members.
That I think would be a good idea.
If feel better, we can do that. It's not wouldn't be what normally happens in a local authority, but I understand your worries.
I think that would be very much appreciated. It is a channel where we've got somebody that can just inform us of the current progress. Right, Councillor Williams?
I was just going to make the point which Aisling touched upon. The Children's Trust is another vehicle the local authority can use to further relationships. I've had lots of discussions with Miss Yates and found her to be very open and honest about the position they're in and the sort of vision she's got. So I certainly don't want to return to the days of friction and mistrust between the local authority and the school. So I think we're banging on an open door in terms of that at the moment. But obviously we just need to be mindful of the role she's got to do and the role we've got to do.
That's all right, Chair. Thank you for coming to me. Whilst it was quite late that I got to see this data, and it is quite impenetrable, my interpretation of it is that, yeah, attainment is actually quite good, but progress is bad. Now, this may be in part due to possible over interpretation of assessments during early stages, specifically perhaps even EYFS. I was just wondering if the monitoring of moderation of attainment at EYFS, how that was achieved.
So one of the local authority's statutory duties is to moderate EYFS, Key Stage 1 and Key Stage 2 writing. And because the school, and because we've been aware that the school is in a poor position, we have commissioned moderation in the last 4 years at Key Stage 1 and at Key Stage 2 writing. EYFS moderation has been benchmarked as being robust and is on a 4-year rolling cycle, and they will be they will specifically be moderated this year as their 4th year. It is Key Stage 2 teachers are very, and even GCSE teachers want to say that the baseline is a bit inflated because it makes life difficult for them. But we're confident the baselines are accurate, that UIFS is accurate, and compared with mainland, we have mainland colleagues who come and visit, and from North Somerset or from Cornwall, and they're convinced that the baselines are solid.
Thank you.
That is absolutely scrutinising the local authority role. Thank you, Councillor Lowe.
Councillor Sims.
Well, just a number of things that have been said I was going to say already, but if you look at 115, basically the school is at maximum level of intervention. Everything that can be done is being done. And whilst certainly a level of frustration around the table that us as councillors haven't got any input, well, flat, we haven't. We can just monitor and look and express concern. And I would say, I would think it's probably worth making the point that a number of the issues that the school have had has been because of unwanted local authority intervention over the last 30 years. And that's caused huge issues with the school. So I think, yeah, we watch and be concerned, but don't expect a great deal of input because it's not our role.
Councillor Davis.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was one of a small number of councillors who had the opportunity to go around the school and a few days ago, and I was very impressed with the actual atmosphere. We had plenty of time. We were able to see the children at work. We had time to talk to the teachers, and we had a small session afterwards with the head teacher. And as far as I'm concerned, I came away very impressed. The atmosphere, as I said, was good. We had plenty of time. Time was given to us. We were listened to, and we listened to some very impressive children who answered every question honestly and sincerely. We were able to open every door, literally and figuratively. And as I say, I went, having heard for years of the problems we've had at the school, but as far as being a member of this authority goes and scrutinising the school, I have every reason to believe that we're on the right track and that things are going to improve. And I don't think that I think this is the sort of relationship we should have with our school rather than actually scrutinising the figures too deeply. We have only one school, as has been pointed out to us, and the figure, and with very small numbers, and it's very difficult to extrapolate from small numbers. Yes, there have been problems. They have been recognised, and as far as I can see, they're being attended to. I know it's difficult. We all go through school very quickly compared with the rest of our lives, and it's most important that children get the best benefit of that. But whatever we do is going to take a little bit of time, but I'm sure that in a year's time we'll have a much better report.
Councillor Smith.
Thank you, Chair. Regarding 1.9, the conversion process to academy, obviously, the delay is a concern to staff, parents, pupils. What are the new timelines on that, please?
Okay, so the current timeline is aiming for the 1st of April. The MAT have employed a project manager now whose sole function is to drive the academisation process from their side. There are a number of legal queries concerning land usage and deeds and various other bits and pieces that have been difficult to resolve. But with a project manager employed by the MAT, they have a clear directive to drive the process maybe more rapidly than they had in the past.
Any more questions? Councillor Marcus.
So just in terms of the actual proposal and scrutinising the figures, I'm happy to take reassurance from officers that the local authority is doing as much as it can and has made good effort. But in terms of the stats, I can't understand. If I can't understand the stats, then I can't take assurance from the numbers. And because I haven't had training, I understand that these previously were presented to the Children's Committee. And so there's going to be a group of there's going to be some people here with knowledge and to how to interpret those stats. What I'm just concerned about is that I take assurance from numbers that I don't understand. So in this case, I'm going to have to trust you guys that you are doing what you are. But in the future, I would like to see that, to make sure that members have had training in this so they can understand and give you some good questions about the numbers. So just to take that on board.
We have a recommendation. Is there a proposal for the recommendation, or do you want to change it? Or Councillor Sims, is there a seconder for the recommendation? Seconded by Councillor Grottick. All those in favour? Motion carried. Thank you. Item 13. Nicola, thank you.
Thank you, members. It's a difficult place we're in as a council, isn't it? There's that financial context that we've talked about in the budget, and we've just looked at the consultation document for the local plan. So it's with a lighter heart I say, what can we do? And what we can do is start looking at our assets and start thinking about how we can improve the experience for our community in terms of housing. So at the moment, what we've got is a situation where the market really isn't delivering enough affordable homes for our communities. So we could leave that be. We could accept that over the last 5 years, we've had 9 affordable homes and that we've got more people in housing need as the years go by, or we could do something about it. So this is the first step really along that journey of doing a housing delivery plan for the council to actually put their money where their mouth is, if you like, and start using our own land to look at delivering homes on. So this is really just to get everybody on the same page, just to say, shall we do a housing delivery plan? Let's keep the options open for now because we don't know what the opportunities are. Let's go and look at the sites that we've got. Some are small, some are larger. We may need to take a programme approach to get economies of scale. And let's look at the site viability and feasibility on the sites that we've got so far. What is the potential size of that programme? So with our own assets, at this point in time, we don't know of the land we've got, whether there's a possibility of building 5 homes, 15 homes, 25 homes. So let's get that work started now. So this report is the first part of that journey to taking policy into delivery. So what I'm asking from you today, members, is support within developing that housing delivery plan, keeping our options open for now, but doing some site viability and feasibility work on all the sites that the council owns in light of our local plan policy to see what we can do in terms of affordable housing delivery for our community.
Debate. Councillor Grottick.
Thank you very much. I found this a very interesting report. It's not very long, but there's an awful lot in it, and I'd like to commend the officer for a very clear and concise report. I would like to add a recommendation, subject to colleagues' approval, that perhaps at 4 or perhaps to amend 3, the implications of right to buy be evaluated and reported back to full council in terms of the delivery of affordable homes, because there's a lot of debate in the press and the media at the moment about this concept, and how it is actually happens here is obviously a very pivotal part of the provision of housing right the way around, especially affordable homes. Would you like to comment on that?
Okay. Thank you. And I think when we look at the delivery options, it'll depend on what the delivery options, what the right to buy implications will be. So I think at the next stage, what we'll be saying is that if we've got a programme approach here, that means we're going to be doing potentially a joint venture, or we're going to be doing a delivery company, then the right to buy implications will be different to if we deliver ourselves. So I think we'll pick that point up. But I think what we'll try and look at is all those implications. What's best for our communities? What are the risks of right to buy within those delivery options? So it's something we'll need to look at that next stage.
Councillor Marcus?
Yeah, I'd just like to say thank you very much for this report. We've had, myself and the senior managers, we've had some really good discussions around the housing market and how to stimulate the housing market, and I would be looking forward to some really innovative and radical solutions to the current broken situation in terms of housing on the Isles of Scilly. I think it's important that hand in hand with the local plan that the public get to see that the council is thinking about housing delivery and thinking about how we're going to increase the housing stock and deliver housing on the island. So I welcome these recommendations. And I propose the recommendations as they stand.
Councillor Williams? Oh, sorry, no, we've got a second as well. Councillor Lady Barker. Councillor Williams?
Yeah, I totally endorse what's already been said about the quality of the report. I'm just very aware that if I look at sort of my inbox, a lot of my casework tends to be specifically around housing. There's obviously aspects in this report which could potentially be contentious. I just wonder when we do our work around the peer challenge and lead member roles, whether we consider having some sort of members champions for housing as a sort of go-to member for some of the points which are of concern to individuals in our community today, but also on a strategic level going forward.
I understand your concern. However, I think that is for a future debate during the workshops rather than now.
Just flagging it.
Yeah, okay. Your flag has been seen. Okay. Councillor Sims?
Again, a good, clear report, but I'm just slightly confused. All three of the recommendations, I would rather assume we've already been doing it. Or is this just like a
formalising it?
Refresh to tie in with the local plan? That's
Yes.
fine. But I just, in case anybody runs with the belief that this hasn't been ongoing for years and years and years, I just wanted to make that point.
Yeah, I think Councillor Sims makes a good point. Is it worth having a timescale for recommendation 3?
I think we're going to be very careful on putting timescales on that.
Why?
One.
Why?
Because the deadline may well not
6
be met,
months?
but I think as soon as possible might be.
6. So let's within 6 months then. Can we add within 6 months to recommendation 3? Is that
feasible? Are you happy with that? Yeah. Right, we have a proposer. Oh, sorry, Councillor Smith.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I just want to flag up, only because I noticed it on this report, but it's not limited to this report, that there's a lack of sign-off on a lot of reports throughout the document. Now, it may be that this report doesn't have to be signed off financially or by the Chief Executive, but if so, I think it needs to say so, because right through the document, I've seen a lack of sign-off. Yeah, but not by...
Yeah.
So I'd like to flag that up to all.
Let's just make it clear that Matt's signed this one off, but maybe the others haven't. So.
Okay. Right, we have a proposal with a timescale on it. If you're sorry. Oh, sorry. I thought that was just a comment rather than a question.
Okay, so it's something we've been discussing, and we are developing a protocol for reports to come forward early enough to be signed off and seen by all of the relevant officers, so that hopefully moving forward, when you get your agenda pack, all of the reports will have been signed off by the right people. And we have already started, over the past couple of months or so, there has been some kickback. If reports haven't come forward in time, they've had to be delayed so that we have time to look at them properly.
That's encouraging to hear, because it was actually specifically brought up at the Corporate Peer Challenge that this is happening, and that as members we do have to ensure that I's are dotted and T's are crossed. So I'd just like that to be noted, please, by senior managers and Chief Executive. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. I can confirm what the monitoring officer just has talked about. So a set of new guidance and procedures has been developed. It's in draft form and will be taken to the next corporate leadership team for final sign-off, and then it will be rolled out, which will address executive decision.
Councillor Francis.
Thank you, Chairman. No, I would just like to welcome this report and thank the senior manager for being proactive, thinking outside the box, and trying to take this forward. It's much welcomed. Thank you.
Okay, any more comment before I take it to the vote? Right, we have 3 recommendations, and the third one has an amendment on it. If you're the proposer and secretary are happy to put the 6 months amendment on that, are you? Yep. You're happy with that? With that 6-month amendment on it, take it to the vote. All those in favour of all 3 proposals? And that's unanimous. Thank you very much. Item 14. Nicola, do you want to do that, or is it Mike? Sorry, both of them. Do you want to?
Just like
Members, just 1 second, your attention, please.
Sit down. If you want to find a seat, we can shuffle along. So I'd just like to introduce Mike Coates and Sandy Campbell, who are our environmental health team. Recently moved to the islands. You've probably seen them around town doing some food inspections, and they're starting to now get to grips with our policy situation and our enforcement procedures. And this is one of a number of reports they'll be bringing to the council for approval. So I'll just hand you over to Mike and welcome them both to the council and to the team.
Can you push the button, Mike? Thank you.
Well, thank you for the introduction, and hello to everybody around the table. For me, I just wanted to do a quick introduction on the private sector housing enforcement policy. As you probably will all be aware, we've been evolving as an environmental health team now since September 2017 on this, and we're looking at legislative requirements with the new Housing and Planning Act 2016. The members, the environmental health team, are aware that there has been little private sector housing intervention on the island before, and as such, this new policy will give clear directions to all stakeholders about a proportionate and fair service delivery. So basically, throughout the report, you will see that it covers advice, education and support as being key. Enforcement only where imminent risk of serious harm. The policy will describe how enforcement is the last option. Prevention is better than cure, and the aim really is to prevent poor health through poor housing. So that's the main aim. I'd just like you to pass on to Sandy Campbell now a quick overview on the enforcement policy.
We've already started work with private sector housing across the islands, dealing with a few properties. Oh, sorry, I'm loud anyway. So what we've tried to set out here is this is basically a framework document of how environmental health will operate with landlords and tenants alike. Having read the document, you'll see that it covers quite a lot of legislation. HMOs haven't really been looked at on the islands, so with a very specific focus for HMOs. You'll see that proportionality is a common theme throughout the entire document. We're here to work with businesses. We're very conscious of the better regulation agenda. We want to give advice. We want to give support. We want local businesses to get on the right side of compliance. That's our aim and our positive outcome. However, alongside the better regulation agenda, there are now penalties being introduced under the Housing and Planning Act 2016 for certain offences. Civil penalties. So we only intend to apply these for situations where we would actually prosecute. So for repeat offenders or landlords who are just not applying the statutory requirements to their business in rental properties. Some of that legislation allows us to put civil penalties forwards of up to £30,000, but you'll see in one of the appendices that we've even scaled those down so that they're proportionate to risk. So in some cases, we might be looking at a civil penalty for £500 if it's a reasonably much lower risk. So the recommendation today is that members approve the policy, agree that it is proportionate and that the fees and charges set out are practical and reasonable.
Thank you for that. Having read through it and what have you, I think it is an excellent piece of work that has been missing throughout the council's policies for a number of years, and it's something that has needed addressing for a very long time. Questions, please. Councillor Williams.
Yeah, I just had a query regarding the definition of private sector housing. And for example, would a landlord like the Duchy of Cornwall constitute a private sector landlord in these legislations? Yes. Okay.
Who do social housing providers. Although it's social housing, a lot of the legislation that we have here, some inside there doesn't, but most of it does. When it comes to housing standards, the local authority has that statutory function with registered social providers as well.
Councillor Legg.
Thank you, Chair. A lot of duchy leases on the island are full maintaining and repairing leases. Where do those people stand? Because they're duchy leases, but they're responsible for maintaining the property.
You'll find that there's a common thread through most housing legislation that refers to short-term tenancies, those of 7 years or less. Some are very specific to assured short-hold tenancies. So the very simple answer is anybody that has signed a full repairing lease is entirely on their own in terms of housing standards. That wouldn't stop us. Apologies. Again, that wouldn't stop us from going along and giving advice to a tenant and giving advice to the duchy and saying, well, these are what the housing standards would be for hazard clarification, let's call it hazard clarification, and then they can sort out the legalities themselves. The local authority would be out in terms of enforcement.
Councillor Marcus.
So, considering this is a new policy and that and you're new to the islands, how applicable do you think this policy is? How busy do you think this is going to be? Do you think there's going to be some impacts? What is the impact of this policy going to be?
What we need to do is target high-risk properties. We're already in some of those properties, but outside of this framework sets clarity for landlords and tenants of how we operate. What we will do now is start to snowball some of those properties that we're looking at, in particular houses and multiple occupation. One of the biggest things here is staff accommodation. We've already been into one HMO, an 11-bedroom HMO, and the standards weren't up to scratch. The premises needed a licence. This sets out the penalties. We are very, very proactively working with the owner of that premises to bring him on the right side of the law and have done so already. So what we will do now is when people make complaints to us about housing standards, we react in the way that is set out here. What we will do is we will also proactively target high-risk premises such as multiple occupancy. And horizon scanning, there are changes in the legislation which are coming through in about October this year. They're not yet finalised. The government has given a consultation response, but not given the detail of the changes that are coming out. But for houses in multiple occupation that need licensing, they're going to take away the story element of the prescriptive regulations. So if you own or you know of staff accommodation being shared by 5 people or more, there is every chance with shared amenities and facilities, there's every chance that those properties by the end of this year are going to be flagged for licensing. So the more and more we get in now, the more and more we're identifying and hopefully help the owners of these premises ahead of the game. The intention is not to find these premises for the purposes of enforcement and fines. That's not what we're setting out to do.
Well, given the lack of regulation, or total lack of regulation really on this previously, I fear you may well be opening a right can of worms, because yes, people are suddenly discover they're walking straight into a wall they didn't know was there. So I think I got the impression that you were going to view, you'll probably find a lot of stuff which is severely wrong. I'm getting the impression that you're going to view it sympathetically at least, because I think you're going to get a lot of problems and probably find yourselves in danger walking home at night if you don't do it if you don't do it sympathetically.
I think I'd just like to add a comment to that, is that I have had a little bit to do with our 2 AHOs, and believe you me, they are proactive in being pleasant about the situation and proffering advice before it gets to that, Steve. Thank you. Does that sum it up?
We're not unfamiliar with being unpopular. It's the nature of the business.
Indeed.
But just to give you some reassurance, the first significant HMO that we walked into in discussions with the owner, they didn't even know that they were a residential landlord. They had no concept. So starting from the very ground up, today that person is now on the right side of the law.
Councillor Williams.
Yeah, it's just that this is obviously very focused at private sector and quality and security of those. But I'm just wondering, are we confident that the housing stock of the local authority is of a very good quality and not sort of in contention with the policy itself?
That's the second time we've heard that question, isn't it, Mike? We have heard that before. Just to clarify, We have already, because we're trained in the housing health and safety rating systems, which is now the definitive standard for assessing the safety of housing, we have already offered our housing team to go in and give advice, and we have done so on a few properties. And conversations with Nicola is that that's something that we will fit in around our day job, because we've got an awful lot of food and health and safety inspections to do as well, that we will try and snowball and inspect our own stock. You must be clear, and the 151 officer will confirm that we have no regulatory authority over ourselves as a department. We can't serve notice, but through housing revenue accounts, if there's issues in terms of safety, then standards will be raised.
I guess the point is to have our own house in order before we do.
Absolutely.
Councillor Smith?
Thank you, Chair. Regarding 3.2, there's several legal parts to this, and I just wanted to check actually also with the monitoring officer. See, I've got two different versions of the report. One has a sign-off from yourself and one doesn't. So I want to check that this is signed off by the monitoring officer because of the implications of the comply with legislation.
So I think what's happened is the report that's in the main agenda, I signed off. This isn't my area. So I had a colleague in the legal team at Cornwall Council look through, and there were very few comments that were made. It was a really robust document coming forward. So I've signed off that main report. I think what's happened is that there was a desire to publish Appendix B, the summary of charges, and the report has just simply been published again with it in the same terms. I don't think the covering report has changed, has it?
That's right.
Take that assurance.
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry, the
comment?
policy didn't get published in the second one.
Any more comments or questions? Right, we have a recommendation. I've got a proposer by Councillor Mumford, seconded by Councillor Sims. All those in favour? That's unanimous. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Item 15. You taking this one? Yeah. Nicola, thanks.
Okay.
Thanks, gentlemen. Thank you.
Okay, item 15 is really the rent setting for our social stock. It's our hands are tied really pretty much on this one because we are required under the Welfare Reform and Work Act to restrict rent increases. In fact, it has to be a rent decrease. This is the third of 4 years. There is a correction to para 1.2. In the great optimistic world in which we live, it said this is the final year of the 1% reduction. In fact, next year, 1920 is the final year of that reduction. But the recommendation stands. You need to approve the rent reduction. It's 1%. There's nothing we can do about that. It's set in law. And so our hands are tied. What it does mean in terms of those repairs that you've just talked about, in terms of bringing our properties up to standard, we have to be really careful about our maintenance programme, that we make sure we cut our cloth according to our means. So we're working very closely with Sandy around the standards within our existing social stock to make sure they meet the minimum standards. But with the rents that we're collecting, we can't do a gold-plated service. We have to cut our cloth according to our means. So we are looking very carefully at the costs associated with the repairs and maintenance, and working closely with Craig and his team to look at what works can be brought in-house to make sure we get value for money for our repairs and maintenance. Thank you.
Any questions? Councillor Smith?
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to ask Senior Manager, I mean, you know, clearly this is unattractive for us financially. Is there is no option?
No.
Right, so, yeah. It's a shame, yeah.
Bring the same report back next year.
Yeah. Nicola, is there something you want to add to the proposals?
No.
You'll do it on the second one, okay. Okay, sorry, Councillor Williams?
Yeah, it's just a query over the 50-week year as opposed to a 52-week year. Is that just the total is divided by 50 weeks for some reason?
Yeah, so basically people get a 2-week holiday at Christmas. So we take the 52-year payments, we divide by 50 to give people a 2-week rent holiday during the Christmas period.
Councillor Sims?
Well, we got no choice, so I would, kicking and screaming, I will recommend the proposal.
Councillor Marcus?
Yeah, it's it doesn't seem, considering that social housing is for it's affordable rent. It's for people who, I don't quite know how to phrase my
It's a political
frustration.
decision that's been taken above our heads.
Well, yeah, but I can say my frustration at that decision as well, and that government aren't giving us the opportunity to fund the housing stock to an appropriate level. But saying that, we have no choice, so I second that proposal.
Councillor Legg, you want to say something? Oh, it's okay. Any more comment before I take you to the vote? All those reluctantly in favour? That's unanimous, thank you. Item 16, Nicola.
Thank you. Following on from that is the properties we hold in the general fund also need their rent setting for the coming financial year. We've set this at CPI plus 1%, which is the industry norm, if you like. One thing that's missing from the recommendation, but is covered in the report, is the requirement to look at the garage rentals as well. And there should be a further recommendation too, that members approve an increase of 4% in the annual rents for all council-owned garages for the forthcoming financial year. So we need to add that as a second recommendation. It was covered in the reports, unfortunately, but was missed off on the recommendation, so my apologies for that. Basically, I think between the two reports, what we need to do over the coming year is look at the business plan, look at our repairs and maintenance across the whole programme. It sits alongside the housing delivery work that we're doing, the new stuff. We've also got to make sure that we're looking after our older stock and making sure that we protect that asset as well. So when I come back next year with the reports, I would hope to bring a business plan, a medium-term business plan, looking at how we maintain our stock for the following 3 or 4 years. Thank you.
Any questions? Is there a proposal? Proposed by Vice Chair Councillor Grottick, seconder, please.
I'll second it.
Councillor Sims, all those in favour? Carried. Item 17. Best of assurance.
Right, thank you again. So I will be quick because it's getting to the end of the meeting. So what I did was I did include the entire reports because they're not available on a website yet. So, but then I pulled out the key recommendations. So what I'll do with those recommendations, if you're happy to accept them, I'll put them into the Children's Services Development Plan and the Adult Social Care Development Plan, which are already in place. And the LGA were very impressed by those documents. And then what can happen is in the proper cycle of full council, as I bring back service plans, you can see how we progressed against those recommendations. The first one about remote access, that's already in place as of next week. So, you know, these things are dynamic. There was some stuff in there about risk management, and I think that was just one of those things. You've got 2 or 3 days with them, so you cover as much as you can, and then the report's done. And actually, there was a huge amount of work done on risk about 2-3 years ago, so it actually is quite a strong framework, but it's fine. Just take it on the chin, put it into the recommendation, and then you can discharge it quite quickly. So the really important thing about children and adult services is that you have to always be continuously improving. You can never say, job's done. That's actually when you're in a really dangerous situation. So having ideas for improvements, putting them into a service plan, and then monitoring that we've delivered it actually looks incredibly strong, both for the people who use our services, but also for external inspectors. But overall, these 2 pieces of work should give you, as members, reassurance that, again, your officer team are discharging their statutory obligations effectively. So around child safeguarding, adult social care, education excellence, all those different functions. It's for you, not for me, that you know what we're up to and that we're effectively delivering our obligations.
Any questions? Councillor Marcus?
Yeah, there's 6.2 in the report, page 275, about SEN, and there's nothing in the recommendations about SEN. Is that is in the service plan already? Sorry.
So when I did the test of assurance, you have to provide a certain amount of documents, which I have done always because you need them for Ofsted. So our Children's Services Service Plan already has those actions. So all these ones here are just additional stuff to put on service plans, if you see what I mean. Yeah, I could have brought them today. You can have them at the next council.
Councillor Grotty?
I'd just like to quickly note that on page 268, I was very pleased to see that this had picked up on the fact that the SDP plans are incredibly wide-ranging and the devil is in the detail. And I was very pleased to see the comment that this now needs to move to implementation, well, smoothly and hopefully quite carefully. But a clearer view of what this will look like for the Isles of Scilly is absolutely pivotal.
And that's then we're doing that piece of work right now. So that's all in hand.
Are there any more questions? We have two recommendations. Is there a proposer? Councillor Sims proposed, Councillor Mumford seconded. All those in favour? That's unanimous, thank you. Right, we move on to part 2 reports, which are for information. Lead members' updates are on page 323 and 328. Are there any queries about that? Sorry.
It's not about that at all. It's just, I don't know if other members will find it confusing, but if possible in future, can we revert to having the first part of every agenda item on the front of the sheet, because it's very difficult to find them in the thing. It's a lot easier. It's a silly little point, but I'm spending a lot of time scrabbling around trying to find things.
Right. Right, we therefore move on to part 3. I therefore, that under section 100 brackets A bracket 4 of Local Government Act 1972, the public be excluded from the meeting for the following item of business on the grounds that it involves the likely disclosure of exempt information as defined in paragraph 2 of part 1 of schedule 12A of the Act, bracket as amended, information which is likely to reveal the identity of an individual. Sorry.
Can I just check that the webcam has been turned off? The live stream.
Hang on, we need to propose that first before.
Right. Okay, I see. Yeah.
Proposed by Lady Barclay, seconded by the Vice Chair. All those in favour? Against? That's unanimous. Right.